Good afternoon. This is Weekend Connection on BBN. Today's Weekend Connection is all about the vaccines. Yes, the COVID-19 vaccines. My guest is Dr. Jeff Barrows from the Christian Medical and Dental Association of Bristol, Tennessee. Let's get connected with Dr. Barrows on Weekend Connection. Good afternoon, my friend. I welcome you to Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. I have as my guest today Dr. Jeff Barrows. He's with the Christian Medical and Dental Association from Bristol, Tennessee. Dr. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm very good, Ed. Good to be with you. How are you?
Well, I am doing well, and I've been looking forward to this interview because there is much information to get out. And we're going to be talking about the COVID vaccines and realizing that many have already gotten the vaccine. But first, my burning question is this. Are you in any way related to the late Cliff Barrows?
Ed, you are not the first to ask that, and I'm sorry to say no, not to my knowledge at all.
Okay. Well, I figured other people have asked you that. So now that we've set the record straight, let me go ahead and move on, and let's do that. COVID-19 vaccines, they are out, they are being distributed, and I thought it would be good today to talk about them. I'm just going to go ahead and let you lead out in this, and let's just talk about these vaccines in a straightforward way, shall we?
Sure. I think probably the best way is kind of dealing with them in the order that they were given emergency use authorization by the FDA, and that was back in December when the FDA first learned about, and then gave an EUA to a vaccine from Pfizer-BioNTech. And both the Pfizer and the next vaccine, Moderna, are very, very similar. They are what is known as messenger RNA vaccines. And let me just say that all of the vaccines that are out there, not just here in the States, but internationally, all really the vast majority focus on getting our body to create an immune response to what we call the spike protein. So for your listeners who have seen a picture of the coronavirus, they will see this little doodad, this little spike that's sticking out from the surface of the virus. It actually, under the microscope, creates a crown appearance, and that's why these are called coronaviruses. And that spike protein is very prominent, and so all of the vaccines are focusing on getting our body to create an immune response to that particular portion. And they do it in different ways. So both the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna use technology, as I mentioned, that's called messenger RNA. And messenger RNA is found in every cell in our body. Our body is literally loaded with it. If you think of our body as made up of cells that are basically protein factories, and messenger RNA is basically the template for the various proteins that our body makes. And so our body, depending on the tissue that you're talking about, is constantly making all kinds of different proteins. And so what Pfizer and Moderna did is they said, hey, why don't we create a special template, a piece of messenger RNA that will allow our body's protein manufacturing process to actually manufacture the spike protein. And then as our body releases that spike protein into the bloodstream, it will then see that spike protein as foreign, abnormal, and create an immune response. And that's what they've done. And if your listeners have been aware and reading about this, they'll know that both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines have been highly successful. They do generate a very strong immune response, and have been used now all across the United States. I think right now, in terms of number of doses, we've had almost 172 million vaccine doses administered here in the United States. the vast majority of those being these mRNA vaccines. So with that, I'll stop and see if you have any areas where you want me to clarify with those.
No, that's very, very clear, Doctor, talking about Pfizer and Moderna. And then, of course, there's the Johnson and Johnson vaccine and Novavax, right?
And what Johnson and Johnson did is it took the messenger RNA vaccines are coated in a little bit of specialized lipo nanotechnology. But Johnson and Johnson decided to take a virus called an adenovirus, which is basically a cold virus, and they took out a specific piece of the genetic material that neutralized the adenovirus, and then they inserted genetic material that will also cause our body to create the spike protein. So it's similar to the messenger RNA vaccines, except it's using a different carrier, the adenovirus, and the genetic material is a little different, but the end result is it causes our bodies to again produce the spike protein. And the important thing to remember, I've had people ask me, can these vaccines give me or give us COVID-19? And absolutely not. It is a valid question because in the past, older vaccines have used actually either what we call live attenuated viruses, where they'll take the actual infectious virus and they'll kind of weaken it a little bit, and then they'll give that as a vaccine. And quite honestly, it's possible for that vaccine to have given the person the actual infection. But in these particular vaccines, they're only allowing the cells to make that very small spike protein, not the whole virus. So it's absolutely impossible to get the infection from the vaccines themselves.
But I have a quick question there. Then why have I read just very occasionally of people supposedly getting getting the virus after receiving a vaccine? And I've read a news report once or twice about this, not often, but I have seen these reports.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it does happen coincidentally, and that's because there are so many people that are getting the infection. So it doesn't surprise me at all as a physician that someone who gets a vaccine and then a day later they get exposed to somebody who is an asymptomatic carrier, gives them the infection. Their body hasn't had enough time to develop immunity, and so then, yes, they get sick. So that clearly will happen.
So we've covered so far Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson. We've seen news reports and have heard news reports about the AstraZeneca. Now, that's not available here in the U.S., right? But it was and may still be available in some countries overseas.
Yes, it's widely available in Europe and many African countries, and I believe it's also available in South America. But you're right. As of now, they have not approached the FDA to obtain an emergency use authorization.
They have not approached the FDA?
Not yet. There have been several kind of hiccups with that particular vaccine. It's very similar to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It uses a little different virus as the vector, but otherwise it's very similar to Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson, though, is only a one-dose vaccine. The Pfizer and the Moderna are both 2 doses, and the AstraZeneca is also a 2-dose vaccine. But it very closely resembles the Johnson & Johnson vaccine otherwise. But they've had some hiccups across the country, across the world in their studies, their phase 3 trials. There was a question not long ago about an increase in blood clots, and a closer evaluation of the data showed that those were again coincidental, because when you start giving a vaccine to literally hundreds of thousands of people, those same people will get sick with things, and blood clots are relatively common. So when they began looking closely to see was there an increase in the incidence of blood clots with the AstraZeneca vaccine, they really found no, there was not. I was just reading a report yesterday. There is still a slight question of a couple of rare types of blood clots that might be associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's a blood clot that occurs in the brain and a blood clot that occurs in the intestines. Extremely rare, but still, the European Health Agency has reviewed it, and they found really about a chance of about 1 in a million of that happening with the AstraZeneca. So I think that those little hiccups have held up the process for getting AstraZeneca approved in the United States.
I've got Dr. Jeff Barrows on the telephone with me for Weekend Connection. Dr. Jeff Barrows is with the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Now, doctor, there has been some concern from some that fetal cell lines have been used in various stages of development of these vaccines, and simply wanting to discuss this from an informational standpoint. Can you elaborate a bit on this for our listeners?
Sure, Ed. There really are two separate, and what we term it as abortion-derived fetal cell lines. One fetal cell line was derived from an abortion in 1972 in the Netherlands. And that particular cell line is called HEK293, and that stands for human embryonic kidney cells. And it was actually the 293rd attempt to develop the cell line that was finally successful. This is, of course, at first, if Christians are just beginning to learn about this, of course, will elicit a form of what I would term moral repugnance. We, of course, as Christians don't want to have anything to do with abortion, and certainly we don't want to be seen as benefiting directly from an abortion. So a lot of people, when they initially hear this, they say, well, I'm not going to take a vaccine that has anything to do with an abortion. Well, I think it does require us to look a little deeper and answer a couple of very important questions. The first question is there any evidence whatsoever that the abortion in 1972 occurred in order to create this cell line? And that's an important question to answer, because if there's evidence to say that the abortion did occur in order to create the cell line, then anybody benefiting from that cell line is actually seen to be complicit with the evil of the abortion. But all of the evidence, including testimony by the person who created the cell line, is exactly the opposite, that the abortion was going to occur no matter what. Reasons are unknown. The woman was far enough along in her pregnancy. She had decided she didn't want the pregnancy. She had requested an abortion. And as a side effect, the tissue was taken from that abortion and the fetal cell line was created. So that's an important question. The second question to answer is the use of this fetal cell line in some way going to be associated with future abortions? And actually, again, the answer to that is no, because if it was yes, then once again, we as Christians could be complicit with evil in our participation in taking these vaccines. But in fact, because the cell line is called an immortal cell line, it's going to continue for many, many years. There is no reason to have any future abortions. And so we can then be comfortable in the use of that. The third item that needs to be addressed is there a way that in the future these companies can make these vaccines without using the fetal cell lines? And if so, we as Christians need to be advocating for what I would call ethically pure production of vaccines.
Well, that was my next question, Doctor. Is there a way in the future that these vaccines can be developed without these particular cell lines, but say with cell lines from babies who died in another way apart from an abortion, I guess is my question.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And the good news is yes. And in fact, there exists right now, I understand, the technology to even use insect cells or animal cells. And so we at CMDA have joined with other organizations to write letters and advocate to these pharmaceutical companies and say to them, we are willing to take this vaccine now, but we want you to know that in the future, as new diseases come out and new vaccines are developed, that we would strongly prefer that you use these more ethical approaches. And we can also promise that Christians will be much more likely to take your vaccine if, in fact, it is produced with pure ethical cell lines.
Dr. Jeff Barrows will be back, Lord willing, next Saturday on Weekend Connection as we continue our conversation about the COVID-19 vaccines. Weekend Connection is a public affairs program of the Bible Broadcasting Network. It's on every Saturday, 4:02 p.m. Eastern Time.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.